Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for today's video as we're going to discuss the Kevin Durant rumors one more time, and this time spend a bit of focus on the Minnesota Timberwolves, who did have their season unfortunately once again come to a close in 5 games in the Western Conference Finals, this time at the hands of the Oklahoma City Thunder. That marks 2 consecutive years that Minnesota has come up just short of the NBA Finals. And now there is plenty of speculation around the Wolves and what they could do to try and maybe take that next step forward, that next big leap toward winning and getting to the NBA Finals. Of course, they've taken such massive strides early in Anthony Edwards' career. He is a large reason behind it. But I also think there's been a lot of other big-time contributors who maybe don't get the love that they deserve. Rudy Gobert, the trade for Gobert completely changed that franchise from one that was kind of a fun, frisky first-round team to a team built and predicated on defense. And now, with everything that we're hearing, and Brian Windhorst specifically confirming that the Wolves did have significant interest in Durant at the trade deadline.
It became clear to me in talking to the parties involved just how serious the Wolves were about trying to trade for Kevin Durant at the trade deadline.
It creates an interesting dynamic going into this offseason where Minnesota might just feel really disappointed about how the last couple of seasons have ended for them. And now it might be their opportunity to try and strike, something that honestly I wouldn't recommend doing. And I want to shout out Jon Krawczynski here, of course, writes for The Athletic, covers the Minnesota Timberwolves. I know him in person. For those who do not know, I actually covered the Minnesota Timberwolves for a year as well, credentialed in the locker room, all that kind of stuff. And I got to know Jon pretty well. He's a super nice guy. And I thought this comment today regarding the possibility of a KD trade to Minnesota, Aaron here says, if they can put together a package that doesn't include Jaden McDaniels, I'm interested, but giving up Jaden seems really short-sighted. And then Jon responded to this saying, I wouldn't worry about that. And I think it gives us a good deal of understanding that Jaden McDaniels and his salary would not be in a deal, which makes me consider, would Rudy Gobert be in a trade? And I really hope not. I think trading away Rudy Gobert in a deal for Kevin Durant would be extremely short-sighted as well. And I think it would create a huge hole in the Minnesota Timberwolves roster and lineup, especially at that center spot, something that they've had real consistency with the last couple of years. Gobert, of course, not going to be the flashiest player, isn't going to be this huge stats monster, but his impact is undeniable, and Timberwolves fans can attest to that. And if you go back to when they made the trade for Rudy Gobert, I said before everybody else that trade was genius for Minnesota, and everyone else clowned me. Everyone said I was dumb and wrong. The Utah Jazz went from leading the West in wins over a 5-year span to being one of the worst teams in the league after the Gobert and Mitchell trades. And Minnesota completely changed the course of their franchise. For a team that had only been to the Western Conference Finals one time in its franchise history, they now have back-to-back runs to the Western Conference Finals. It has been nothing but a success. The trade for Rudy Gobert has completely changed this franchise in a positive way, and I think trading him away would be a mistake. But we're going to look through some of those possibilities in today's video. I wanted to look at some possible Gobert trades, some possible Kevin Durant trades, and of course, with the connection between these two organizations and all of the reporting that is confirming Minnesota's interest in Durant and Durant's, of course, desire to get out of Phoenix seemingly at this point in time, it is natural for us to talk through some of these potential options. Of course, in this, there are some really tough situations, and for the Wolves specifically, you look at their cap hold situation, they are going to lose some players. Nickeil Alexander-Walker would be one of them. With that in mind, the Wolves do have a little bit of space here. Now, it's going to depend on what happens with this Julius Randle player option, and Naz Reid is going to opt out of this player option. So are they truly a team with first apron space? I don't really think so. So instead, we're probably looking at a second apron space situation where they might be able to still dip below the second apron while bringing in Kevin Durant, but it is going to take some pieces. The first trade, we're going to go through a couple of different renditions here. The first one here, in order to try and keep Gobert in Minnesota and really solidify that center spot, because otherwise you're looking at Luka Garza run, and no, Naz Reid's not a center. He's really a wing forward type. He's not a true 5 at all. So you can't bank on that going forward, in my opinion. So we're going to start with Julius Randle to Phoenix. The issue here with Durant, he makes $54.7 million. In order for Minnesota to make a deal like this work, they're going to have to send out significant salary back. Notice the McDaniels and Randle contracts together do not work because Phoenix is, of course, a second apron team, so this trade composition does not work. So Jaden McDaniels cannot be included in the deal. It could be a Naz Reid sign and trade with Julius Randle to Phoenix. Otherwise, this is when you start getting into the territory of Mike Conley, his salary going out in this deal. All of a sudden, we're getting a little bit closer. Throw in Rob Dillingham's contract. You're starting to inch closer and closer where the Wolves still are a second apron avoidant team at this point in time. Of course, that is before Naz Reid's new contract would kick in, whatever that number ends up looking like. But this is the kind of beginning framework. You might have to throw in another piece in here. Of course, some people are going to say, don't throw in Terrence Shannon Jr. We'll try avoiding that for now. We'll put in Leonard Miller in this deal just to get the money a little bit closer. And then we'll also throw in this pick number 17 and pick number 31 in this draft. So the Suns walk out with not one, but 2 draft assets to work with on top of pick 29. And you're still going to see some of the flaws with this. The Wolves have to still cut $4.2 million of their salary because of the apron rules. And this is where things get really, really hectic and really difficult. That $4.2 million, you're going to need basically a perfect money match in this, which means you're going to need a third team involved. The third team we're going to get involved here is Brooklyn, just given the fact that they have salary space to work with. So if you want to get involved in this way, again, $4.5 million, it's not an easy feat here for Minnesota to accomplish either. Looking at Luka Garza, Jalen Clark, you combine those two salaries, that financially does not work. So we might need to restructure this deal a little bit. Maybe we pull Leonard Miller out. Maybe we pull Rob Dillingham out. And then you look at someone like Dante DiVincenzo. Maybe he goes to Phoenix and Mike Conley ends up getting rerouted to Brooklyn in this kind of deal. This is where Minnesota is still a little bit closer. And then you have to probably throw in another young piece. Josh Minot will send to Brooklyn in this kind of trade. And then we'll have those picks in there still as well. And we will send this through, and you'll see a trade that actually works. The Nets give salary cap relief in this deal, taking the contracts of Mike Conley and Josh Minot. Josh Minot, of course, a young-ish player still at this point, former second-round pick, very good athlete. Played some minutes for the Wolves this past season. You also get Mike Conley in this deal for Brooklyn, just a kind of mentor, veteran point guard. Maybe you could see a team like Portland jumping in for Conley services as a mentor. You know, obviously the Mavericks are looking for point guards. There's been some Chris Paul rumors going around. Mike Conley might have a small market when it comes to teams that would be willing to take in his expiring salary. The Suns walk out with Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo. This is ultimately the cap package in a real twist here. Randle, DiVincenzo, pick number 17, pick 31, and the Wolves get Kevin Durant. Now, I do think Durant comes with his own host of problems at this point. You're trading for a guy well into his late 30s. I think there's a real collection of issues with making this kind of trade. But it is one that gives the Wolves, quote-unquote, that alpha that they're looking for next to Anthony Edwards, and makes it a little bit trickier to actually double-team Anthony Edwards if you have Kevin Durant as one of your spot-up threats off of him, and as another guy who can go get you a bucket, play off the catch, score effectively in isolation still. I mean, Kevin Durant's still a great player. You guys know who he is, a very talented player. And then for Phoenix, I mean, this does make your team better, in my opinion. Like, you walk out with Randle, DiVincenzo, you now have an extra draft pick. You'd have picks 17, 29, and 31 to work with in this class. Maybe you could package the 3 of those to move up for a certain prospect you like, or you take 3 different stabs in the class. Maybe a Du Thero as a guy you could grab at 17, or at 29 you come out with a guy like Ryan Kalkbrenner who could be a real impact front court member for them. There's plenty of options for Phoenix. Again, Brooklyn, you could argue they get like a second round pick in this deal or something, right? This isn't just the overall deal in general. There would be something else included in here for Brooklyn, but I think that's an interesting framework to start with. Otherwise, if we want to go another way and try and use the contract of Rudy Gobert, this is where things, again, financially could make some sense, and this is where you maybe don't need that third team involvement as drastically. This is where Rob Dillingham could maybe go to Phoenix in this deal, and then you're looking at less involvement from a team like Brooklyn here, because now your salary going out is $55.7 million because Gobert does make almost $4 million more than Randle on that player option. And you're able to kind of reshift the deck here a little bit. You still have to send out Minot in this deal, but that's someone I'm sure Brooklyn would be very willing to take in. And this kind of trade framework is still one that does work. It checks out, checks all those boxes. Minnesota still gets Durant. The Suns walk out with a starting center, a really good off-ball player in Dante DiVincenzo, a creation guard, albeit somewhat small, and didn't play a ton his rookie season in Rob Dillingham. I still have a lot of hope in him moving forward. You still get those 2 draft picks. The Nets walk away with a young-ish player again in this deal. You can argue a second-round pick has to be involved or something, right? Maybe pick 31 goes to Brooklyn. You can argue what that little small final nugget in the deal is, what that final little nuance is. That's not going to be a huge deal for Brooklyn, I think, one way or another. We've seen them eat salaries in the past. You know, a small $2 million salary to help facilitate a trade is like nothing. So you could honestly use a variety of different teams. It doesn't have to just be Brooklyn. Some teams have their room exceptions and mid-level exceptions that they could eat into with a small contract like that. So it doesn't have to be Brooklyn. Brooklyn doesn't have any leverage over this situation, really. If they don't want to be involved, it could be someone else. But we're just using the Nets in this trade package as an example. And then for Phoenix and Minnesota, really the framework is how do we get Durant to the Wolves? And again, if you go back and look at the draft picks, because I know some Suns fans are going to say that's not enough for Durant. First of all, I think you're wrong. But if you're looking at the draft picks here, Minnesota really doesn't have much. Maybe you argue a couple second-rounders have to be involved, but this is kind of a fake second. Golden State swap rights here in 2031 on a second-round pick, which is crazy. Maybe a 2029 second goes in, right? Like, maybe the Wolves throw in a little bit more, an extra second-round pick in this deal, but all things considered here, I think Phoenix walking out of a trade with Rudy Gobert, I think they'd have to feel very, very good about themselves. If you guys want to, go follow us over on Twitter. Link is in the description for that. Honestly, in my estimation, if the Suns walk out of a Durant trade with Rudy Gobert, a pick or two, and more okay salary, like a DiVincenzo, like a young Rob Dillingham, then I ultimately think the Suns fleece the Minnesota Timberwolves. If I was Minnesota, I would not trade for Kevin Durant at this point. I would stay far away from that. Durant, there's a reason the Suns missed the play-in this most recent year. Their team was not very well built. I do think Minnesota, a much better overall team context. But if they trade Rudy Gobert, the Wolves don't really have a center. So that's going to be a very significant problem for them, and one that I don't think a skill that Durant provides is going to overcome, especially in the West with how good the big man play is there. You look at Dallas, who's now loaded up with bigs. You look at Denver, of course, who's a very tough out for anybody. OKC's got a bunch of talented big men. I mean, the West is loaded, and it's got a lot of talented bigs, and I don't think Minnesota could withstand the Western Conference very well without Rudy Gobert there holding down the middle, anchoring their defense, and really establishing the way that they play. I hope you guys have enjoyed. If you have, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Thank you all so much again for watching. Really appreciate you, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.